Please put your hands together for Dr. Gavriel Schneider to take us through this.
Firstly, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I hope everybody had a bit of coffee and is ready to go. As you can hear, I'm originally South African. Came out to Australia about 10 years ago. I started my career in the security, safety and emergency response sector. I started my first business about 16 years ago in Africa. Since then, have had a business in the UK, one in New Zealand, and our current group has 4 different business structures that operate here out of Australia. So I've kind of started off where it was all about protecting people, and I've kind of moved on to trying to make money. The two do interlink and intersect, and I have obviously a very strong passion in terms of keeping people safe, enhancing safety, and that's kind of evolved into business success and how do we guide people. Over the last 15 years, I've been fortunate. As we'll see later when we look at business failure rates, if I look at those odds, I'm kind of relieved that my businesses seem to have done better than that. But obviously, we face significant challenges moving forward in terms of, as Tom was saying, how we innovate, what we do, how we move forward, globalization, digitization, all the buzzwords that we get inundated with. We do a lot of work with federal government. Everybody's talking about this resilient and agile workforce of the future. And you sort of go, well, how do we go from what we've got now to an agile and resilient workforce? There's no real plan to make that happen. It's just, if we talk about it, hopefully it'll happen. So I'd like to unpack this topic, which is really close to my heart. I think the core concept around the way we deal with and manage risk from a personal perspective, from an overarching perspective of understanding other people, are the critical building blocks before we can look at anything organizationally. And I often think we get it wrong. We try to focus on what is my organization doing and how do I change policies, and I have a risk register so everything's okay. But we haven't really personalized it and looked at the way people interact and the way people move, cooperate or not cooperate in terms of making things happen. And that's what this is all about. We'll save time here for a few questions. I hope most of you can read that. I think the core frustration that we find with a lot of clients that we deal with and people we talk to is we've become so bound by process and we've become so bound by compliance, and we use an acronym called CYA, cover your ass. Okay. Everybody lives in the CYA approach. We can't get away from it. I have to say, having set businesses up in numerous third world locations, coming to Australia and setting up a startup business here 10 years ago, I truly never knew what paperwork was until I got started with that. And then started seeing, right, well that's great, now your business is set up, but you need this license and you need that license and you also need this permit. But guess what, it's different for every state. So you need that in other places too. So, we get so inundated with these processes. Climbing in and looking at the risk world. And it's really interesting. So a third world perspective from how I grew up and where my service offerings tended to evolve was always around, we have a problem, we need a solution. Okay, we trust an expert to give us that solution, and we don't want to see the 50 pages of risk-based matrices and calculations you've used to get to that solution. Conversely, 10 years ago when I got started in the risk and security, safety, emergency response consulting side here, I found it to be the exact opposite. Nobody really cares if you can give them the solution straight away. It's how am I going to make sure that if somebody questions whether that was the right solution, I'm not going to get in trouble. And by the way, which standard did you align that to? Because if it's not aligned to a standard or a guideline, then your opinion doesn't matter, even if it's right. So one of the challenges, and this is what we've tried to develop over the last 10 years, is the synergy between those two. There is a happy balance point, and there needs to be a balance point. You can't go, well, let's just fly by the seat of our pants wherever we want and guess what the solution's going to be and hope it's right. But conversely, if we have to run through all the different requirements to make a decision, well, we've lost opportunities. Because that decision-making lag time, just look at customers these days. People want instant response. Okay, they're not happy to wait 24 hours. They're not happy to wait till you call them back a week later, etc. Everything's getting shorter and quicker. We haven't quite got the way we innovate and the way we make decisions down to that efficient time in a practical CYA approach. We can all make a quick decision, but then you second guess yourself or you worry about the fallout. Conversely, as I say, if we take all the time to make the decision, we're often too late. So just a quick example, and those of you in the academic sector know there's numerous places you can source stats from. And I always have a personal issue with stats because you can make them look like whatever you want them to look like, depends where you grab them from. I've just grabbed this example, and it depends on which country and which research center you take from, but they all sort of tell a similar story. Basically, that story is that not only is it really tough to get a startup business off the ground, and I was chatting to these three guests over here who said they're just getting started with something. You know, the challenge of getting a startup business off the ground in its own right is mammoth. But we often forget the ability to survive 10 years. Okay, 71% of businesses don't make it to that 10-year mark. So if we think about it, you know, today I have a great idea and I want to have a crack at that. Yeah, I've only got a 29% chance of being around in 10 years with that business. Yeah, yet we keep talking innovation and adaptation. So there's two sides to this, right? Obviously there's the entrepreneurial flair of let's take something and start it up from scratch. But there's also the need to consistently innovate your existing business, operation, structure, organization, whatever it is, or you're going to disappear. Okay, it's that simple. And we've seen that. You know, when we look at large businesses that you think are unbreakable, and you see them teeter now because of commodity prices. Okay, that's just one example. You know, you see massive industries, video rentals, for example, gone, wiped out. Okay, music industry, totally changed. Telecommunications, totally changed. Yeah, all of those things intersect. And I think that one of the things that we really got to factor in when we look at risk is why do we not take chances? Why do we always look at risk as this dirty word of, okay, I have to do this risk matrix, otherwise somebody may get me into trouble, you know, later on. Or if I haven't followed the scientific approach, you know, maybe my thinking is flawed. Where in reality, there's that little bit of combination between gut feel and process, which we'll talk about as we move on. So just for the sake of being clear, because everybody has different perspectives in their head, all right, there's just two quick definitions for you, and you can all read, so you certainly don't need me to do that for you. But I just want to make sure we're on the same page when we talk about these different things. Yeah, and you know, I think if we take those two concepts and we look at risk and uncertainty, which are interrelated concepts, we look at innovation, okay, and we're trying to look at, you know, we look at buzzwords like efficiencies. We look at, you know, things like likelihood, which is a risk word. Yeah. We see there's a massive intersection here. We then take that back, and Kate was one of our lecturers on the program we've got, loves this quote, so I thought I'd better put it in for her. But it's really interesting. If you take a business as old and as established as Rio Tinto, I'm sorry, PhD, but don't get into trouble. They're both clients of ours. And we look at that figure. Imagine a new startup business trying to achieve efficiencies that a 100-year-old business can't. Okay. Now there's a flip side to that. Starting from scratch means we don't have to reinvent, change, and adjust. So it's often easier to take a startup and build it the right way than it is to retrofit an old organization. Yeah, but it's a significant challenge. And if we want to look at efficiencies, well, one of the core efficiencies is getting more out of what we have. How many people sitting here have employees who work for them? Okay, I noticed none of you smiled and went, yeah, that's great. It's really, I mean, managing people and driving people to achieve things is exceptionally complex. Okay, and my background was always people. But as we've evolved, we've started looking at cyber solutions and how technology integrates. And it still amazes me that when you talk with, you know, the cyber and the tech experts, all the nuances and issues we have in managing people, they talk about with technology. You know, all the failures they talk about around system redundancy, you know, we talk about in terms of people performance and people redundancy. You know, we're not really going to be able to move away from one or the other. It's around the integration and the synergy of both that's critical when we move forward. And if we look at risk, we look at innovation, those two things have to interlink. There's no way we can separate them and think we're going to be successful. As I said, I am originally from Africa, so I'll ask you to humor me with some of the little videos that I choose. But this is one of the things we've seen with a lot of organizations we've worked with. That there's a perception that because we have a risk register, risk is managed. Because we've identified there's a problem, we've rated that problem, we've actually taken the time, effort, and the energy to write it down, and guess what? We've also put some controls in. Yeah, we think it's sorted. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've met with board level structures talking about risk and threat and hazards and, you know, all these different variables that you know, directors worry about. And I'm told, don't worry, it's all sorted out. And then when you actually get down and have a look, you actually go, hold on a second, you know, this quality safety system that the board is sure is being implemented isn't being implemented. Or for example, on the safety side, you know, people throw up their lost time injury rates and go, we've had 0 LTRs in the last whatever. We're going, well, I can guarantee you if that's the case, you've probably got staff lying to you. Okay, because things go wrong. We live in a dynamic world. Okay, people who have to do things get fatigued, are emotional, are stressed. They're not always able to perform at optimal level. Yeah, we all know and we all understand the fundamentals around how risk systems are designed to go what may go wrong and how can we mitigate the likelihood of that going wrong and put something in place. But the more process we drive into it, the less personal it becomes. The less personal it becomes, the more people don't adopt it. And in fact, actually push against it. And it's one of those factors that has really frustrated me. Looking at different specialities, from financial integrated risk modeling through to safety, through to security, through to emergency response, looking at the thought processes around HR and how we find, source, vet, and motivate people, there's this massive disjoint. Okay. So I think this little video explains some of that. So I'll give you a second or two to watch that. Okay, so there's so many things we can talk about after you watching that video. The main thing is to have a little giggle. But the reality is, it still amazes me how many times I see clients who've done a risk assessment. They've gone, right, we want to avoid lines and we want to make sure we don't run into obstacles in our way and whatever it is. They write it down and then they sprint full tilt into the exact thing they think they've managed or trying to avoid. Yeah, because there's this fallacy that just because we've identified it, we've managed it. It's just not true. Anybody familiar with VUCA, V-U-C-A? I'm sure a lot of you are, right? I like to start off a lot of my sessions covering this as a base starting point. It's not new. Okay, if you look at that, it started in the 1990s. But it started in the defense and intelligence sectors. And hasn't been as widely embraced corporately out of the US, okay, as it has in the US. Now, one of the core starting points around this VUCA idea is that if we start off in a paradigm that says, because I've scoped something, measured it, and come up with a solution, it's sorted, we fail. And we will continue to fail because the world is too dynamic. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's ambiguous, okay, it's complex. And those things are here to stay. So if we don't start off understanding that, well, yesterday's planning may actually not be applicable today, and I don't have that flexibility and that agility to be able to change, there's no way I'm going to succeed in today's world. If 20 years ago, no problems. Yeah, we didn't have the digital age where communication was instantaneous anywhere across the world. You couldn't get on a plane and land up almost anywhere in the world within a day and do business. Yeah. Kids weren't growing up with access to instant information anytime. Okay, and it's actually amazed me how those sort of things, those of you who've worked in third world environments, we did quite a bit of work in South Sudan at one stage, okay, which was Africa's newest country about 4 years ago. And a lot of the guys there were totally illiterate, literally couldn't do anything, but they knew how to Google, okay, and literally they would use pictures. Okay, so the guy would, I'd explain a term and they'd go, just give me one word, okay, spell it for me. And out of that, they'll go to Google Images and they'll look at all the pictures and they'll interpret something and they'll come back with a solution. And so we're finding that from a third world perspective, technologies enable people to learn in different ways, quicker ways, more effectively, and make decisions. And so understanding VUCA as a basic starting point for our risk approach and our innovation approach is vital. There's a converse to that though. Okay, where sometimes people come to us and go, well, the very fact that it's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous means I shouldn't bother planning because I might have to throw my plan in the dustbin tomorrow. The reality though is planning gives us context. It also gives us programming, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The way we manage a VUCA world is to balance our risk capabilities. So we've spent quite a bit of time working on how that happens. Now, the first thing we have to do is we have to unpack and destroy previous risk thinking. Anybody seen that before? Who's used that before? Yeah. Right, it's a good tool. And it's in its day, which was roughly 10, 15 years ago, it was a really giant leap forward because it enabled us to take something totally abstract and put a value to it. The reality, though, is does likelihood and consequence really equal risk? Really, truly. If you think about it, it's almost impossible. How many times I've sat with high-level clients, a lot of them in the government and large corporates, who've asked us to come into an independent risk review. And then we'll sit and debate our findings versus their findings until they debate us down so that they don't actually have to do something about the risk we've actually identified as things that need to be actioned. And at the end of the day, I kind of go, well, it's your business. You can in the end do whatever you want, but an impartial view gives you exactly that. Now, when we start looking at that reality, we know, don't get me wrong, we need a base measurement. If we don't have a base measurement, how do we actually know what's worth looking at and what's not? The mistake we make is we think that base measurement tells us the whole story and enables us to plan effectively. We like to talk about something we refer to as the multiplex view, which is more realistic in terms of the way we actually look at risk. There are tons and tons, and sorry, I see you can't read the red that clearly. Okay, there are so many different intersecting variables that come into play when we have to make a decision. It's not as simple as being able to go, this is the likelihood and this is the consequence. Legislation, compliance, culture, history, people, timeframes, budget demands, all of those things interlink. Yeah, and it actually becomes this sort of thing. Everybody's familiar with a magic cube. One of the things we found in a lot of places we look at is that people want that cube to look perfect. They want to make sure that all the sides are the right colors and they all align. So what they often do is they end up pulling the sticker off one side and sticking it on the other one. Yeah, and it looks great until obviously the sticker falls off or something goes wrong, or you turn it around and you go, well, the front side looked pretty good, but all the rest is a big mess. Yeah, so it's quite important for us when we take this multiplex view and we put all these variables together that we also understand the consequences and roll down or domino effects that one change may make to certain things we haven't even considered. Okay. And it's really important that we start getting this larger scale understanding, and we found that most risk experts don't have that, to be honest. They've been taught a process, they've been taught to measure a process, they've been taught to critically evaluate the measurement of that process. They haven't been taught to look at all the cascading impacts and residual risk effects and realities that making or not making a decision could do, because, and I think that's the other variable. Not doing things is sometimes worse than stalling, making the wrong call, etc. We have to sometimes just make a call and do things. We can't get caught up in these processes all the time. So one of the things we try to do, and we unpack it into these two silos. Okay, we talk about strategic and tactical risk. Strategic is the way most high-level organizational risk managers, HR personnel, CEOs, COOs make decisions. That's the nature of that role, right? Somebody sitting at the top and needs to understand the whole picture. So in order to do that, we tend to look at things from a perspective of I have time. I can use standards and tools like ISO 31000, which is a useful tool and guideline. Really useful tool and guideline. But that's what it is. It's a tool and guideline. It's not something that should be binding, that forces you to only utilize that methodology, or you're not compliant and therefore vulnerable. Okay, when we start looking at that, it gives us time to have multiple layers of planning. Okay, I can go plan A, plan B, plan C, and put that together. Okay. If you're really honest in the way we manage risk or opportunity, because they're two sides of the same coin, we need to really take into account, are we doing enough high-level strategic analysis and thinking around decisions we make? Because risks are really all about decision-making. Do I or don't I? And if I do, what could happen? And if I don't, what could happen? That's as simple as we can really make it. Yeah, but if we don't have an overarching understanding of the decision we're making, we obviously may make the wrong call. This mixes up with the tactical capability. Yeah, now if you think about the tactical capability, this is the guy you call when things have gone absolutely wrong. There's crisis and there's panic everywhere, and this is the person that can sort that out. The person who's cool under pressure, can evaluate all the variables, has loads of experience in the specific issue you have to look at, and can help you get through this crisis or this difficult time. Now the drama with that obviously is there's no such thing as a fully integrated, capable risk person who's strategic and tactical across every field. Because technical risk is massive. So if I'm a drilling expert, or I'm a road and transport expert, or I'm an education expert, all of those sectors come with their own risk packages. And as people evolve in their own specialities, so they become technical experts around the risk of that activity. However, we tend to miss the attributes. And you'll notice we talk, the point we've got up there is about understanding yourself. Okay, if you don't understand yourself and you don't look at where your own strong and weak points are, how can you influence others, or how could you influence an organization? If you don't even understand what drives you to make certain decisions, and why you may go left instead of right, or why you are a risk-averse person, or you're somebody with a very high risk appetite, if you haven't even done that base analysis and looked inside first, and looked at your strengths and weaknesses, how are you actually going to solve a problem? We find a lot of this is quite hard, and this is where the psychology and the social psychology pieces become really important. If you don't understand how your own head works, how are you going to try and influence others? How are you going to try and drive an objective? And for too long we've had these specialities. There's sociology that sits here, there's psychology that sits there, economics sits here, behavioral change sits maybe a little bit here and a little bit there. It's not like that in the real world. We all know that. And one of the frustrations I've found crossing in between academia and business and trying to live in both worlds is this conflux where you talk to academics, and academics have got a lot of time to be strategic. The very nature of the fact that they can be analytical and really interrogate something enables that to happen. But that's the exact reason why most academic solutions don't work, because they're not tactical and they don't factor in the tactical requirements of actually doing something. So the mission for us is to look at ourselves critically and go, well, where do I sit? Am I more that side, more that side? Am I that perfect match of both? And have I actually got the understanding of my technical field? Because obviously otherwise this doesn't apply to that field you're in. So that's the starting point. Once I understand myself, we can start trying to take on the challenge of understanding others. Right? And this is the challenge. And I think that little cartoon illustrates just a really simple principle. Sometimes there's more than one right answer and there's more than one right opinion. The more we have hierarchical organizations and structures, the ability for people to be right or wrong fluctuates. In other words, I might be right, but I can't be right if my boss is always right and we differ on something. Okay? I have some staff members here working for me, so I need to be careful. But the reality is, understanding others, we hear all these words around collaboration. Okay, we hear these words around, ensuring groupthink is a practical approach. Making sure that everybody's part of a process, making sure that they, accept and embody the vision we try and achieve. And then when you look at what actually happens on the ground, okay, at the end of the day, you might have had one meeting where everybody talks nicely and then somebody will make a decision and you'll move on. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, because if that never happens, we'll never go anywhere. Okay, the long and the short of it, though, is we can't innovate unless we understand others. And we also can't take risk and turn risk into opportunity unless we actually understand how to influence others in a practical and meaningful way. And there's lots of different aspects to that around communication and leadership. But the base issue, again, is if you don't even understand yourself, how are you going to understand how others perceive you, therefore influence them? So we need this building blocks approach of me, them, and then finally, if we can get that right, we can move to us. Okay, and have a look as a group. I'd like to spend a bit of time debating common sense. And this is one of the things, particularly coming from a safety perspective. Everybody goes, well, why have we got all of these safety guidelines, requirements, intense legislation which can lead to jail time, etc., when it's simply common sense? I think the reality is, I'm sure you've all heard the say common sense isn't so common. But that's because we all look at it from our own perspectives. But my perspective of what common sense should be might not align with what your perspective of common sense is. A quick example. Imagine you live in a third world country, you've been living in the jungle, minding your own business, hunter-gathering, having a really good time. You go for a walk one day and you see this massive path which, very kindly the government has just built a new road right through your forest. You've never seen a car and you've never seen a road. Okay, your common sense is going to tell you, this is the most amazing path I've ever seen. These people must have worked really, really hard to make it so convenient. There's not even a starting point around risk analysis of going, hold on, there might be something very dangerous coming down this path that could hurt me, because there's no basis for that context. Therefore, their common sense evaluation makes perfect sense to them, but you look at somebody from a first world environment who's seen car accidents, for example, the common sense thing would be, surely somebody should have looked left and right before they crossed the road. Never mind walk down the road in the middle. Don't worry, somebody would have to do that. That's normally me. Right, so this concept of common sense is really frustrating for me, but we need to actually embrace it. But what we need to do is build something that's truly common. So if you want to influence an organization, if you don't have common ground, what sort of influence can you actually achieve? And this is something we see in so many organizations when we come and look at how do we enhance or create robust, agile, resilient, risk-reduced environments. What do you actually need to do? Well, the first thing is common ground. So what people want you to do is write a strategy for them and give it to them. Okay, we've seen this fail time and time and time again, where if people could implement change themselves, why have they even bothered to get outside help? Okay, the other side of that is you can't totally use outside help to drive change in an organization. The people who are there, who live it, breathe it, have to embrace it and embody it and find that common so that you can build from. And sometimes we've seen the simplest ideas that make the most sense fail miserably because people don't take them because they're not their own. They felt they weren't involved in the process of scoping what the problem was. They didn't get to give their input as to what the solution would be, even if they agree with the solution. And therefore it's doomed to fail. So it's sometimes that dynamic around people and understanding others that causes us to fail even though we really should succeed on paper because it looks brilliant. I look at some of the businesses that we've had over the years, the ones that haven't worked, we've done the right thing. We've done a risk assessment, we've had a business plan, we've got external advisors in, etc., etc., etc. But they failed because when we transitioned from the plan to operational, we didn't have tactical risk people on the ground who could move and adapt and adjust. And potentially, our common bond wasn't as common as we thought it was. Okay, it might have been common for the leadership team, wasn't necessarily common for the implementation team. So obviously, once we are able to truly understand ourselves and others, we can look at the challenge of organizational change, behavioral change, driving risk appetites to an acceptable and practical level, because obviously there's two sides to this, right? People who take chances everywhere are very, very dangerous for our organization. Conversely, people who totally play it safe and never take opportunities are equally as dangerous in an environment that needs to adapt. So the challenges around understanding your organization, developing a high reliability organization or high performing organization, an exemplar that other organizations want to be like, are massive. I think anybody who sits there and goes, we're sorted, is probably lying to themselves, because you might have it working for this perfect moment in time. Okay, Andrew McKenzie also talks about what his goal is as the perfect day. I'd like the perfect day where everything works and we're 100% optimally, and then hopefully you try and multiply those as you move forward. There's significant push and pull realities, of influencing up and influencing down. There's messaging, there's acceptance, there's the need to make sure that people follow through on processes as opposed to just tick the box. Don't get me wrong, I like online learning. Okay, but we've seen so many people who try and address skills gaps with online learning, and in actual fact, if you look at the real knowledge transfer that occurs in some of these online learning approaches, it's less than zero. In fact, we did an audit of a certain department at one stage and found that basically what they'd do is every now and again there'd be a draw, and the person who lost would have to do all the online courses for the group. Okay. So, because at the end of the day, as long as I'm sitting behind your computer, the perception is I'm the one who's doing it. And so never mind knowledge transfer. Okay, there was zero occurring just based on a flaw in the system of implementation. So again, the goal should be understanding us, understanding others, relating that back to an organization. Sounds simple. If it was simple, okay, why have we got these massive startup and ongoing organizational failure rates? Why is it that people don't scope things correctly at the beginning, can't adapt, and change and mobilize the necessary resources in the time frames required? There's lots of reasons for that. For me, part of what we've got to look at is developing more agile, resilient people who can then lead that challenge. And I think this is what we're looking at. We're not talking about developing risk managers of the future. We're developing risk-enabled practitioners, doesn't matter what your skill set is. If you're an HR person, if you're a CEO, if you're a COO, okay, if risk is your actual job, then this should be a no-brainer. Okay. But we need to bring the empathy and we need to bring people back into the risk dimension. And we need to empower people to realize risk is not a bad thing. If you're a business leader and you're not willing to take any risk, your business will die. Okay, if you're an organization and you're not willing to change and adapt and innovate, which is risk, okay, your organization will be ineffective and will lose whatever it is you're trying to achieve compared to other organizations that will embrace that. You know, with a global marketplace and the fact that people can shop anywhere, anytime, whether it's education or whether it's buying a pair of shoes, okay, competition is intense and will get more intense because the barriers that traditionally separated one market from another are collapsing. So we need to be real about that as we look forward. So as Tom said, I'm going to spend a quick few minutes just talking about the grad cert in psychology of risk. We're really very grateful for the opportunity to partner with ACU to deliver this program. For me, it's been a personal evolution over the last 10 years of moving from really technical, tactical risk and evolving it into that higher and strategic and empathetic approach. But the core reality, and this is what I've seen, is people still are reactive. And we tend to only want to solve a problem once it's already happened. And then we go, oh, I hope it doesn't happen again. Or now I've got a solution in place that won't happen again. There's quite different stories, and there's so many case studies, right? Ranging from half of the board of Sundance Mining getting wiped out on a plane, to BHP Billiton mines collapsing, okay, to politicians doing really stupid things and getting caught in the media. Okay, risk variables affect us every single day in so many different ways. So the grad cert is a really simple program in terms of the way it's structured, really complex in content. Okay, it involves people going on a journey. Okay, that journey is trying to link concepts of psychology, sociology, behavioral economics. Those of you who haven't should really read Dan Ariely and Daniel Kahneman and some of their work. It's really quite interesting because one of the books, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. When you look at all the experiments that these guys have done and you actually look and go, well, there's a little bit of cheat and lie in everybody. How do we manage that instead of ignore it and deny it? Yeah. If that isn't psychology, I don't know what else is. We also tend, and this is my frustration coming from a practitioner's world back into an academic world, we tend to make things very complex when we get academic. Yeah, we tend to put complex names to simple things. Okay, so instead of deciding, if I go left or right, okay, I need to have, a strategic conformed risk analysis methodology. We get really, really complicated. So I think part of the challenge for us in these sort of programs is taking some of the more complicated behavioral psychology, social psychology, and leadership realities and simplifying them and integrating them. So there's 4 units we've structured the program in. I've also brought in a group of experts. Some of them are here today. Guys, those of you who are lecturers on the program, would you hand up quickly? So you'll see there's a few of them sitting around. I have gaps in my own skill sets and knowledge bases, and one of my objectives with this program is I'd like to bring the best people I can find to fill those gaps for the students, instead of sit there and try and convince them I am the expert in everything, which nobody is. So I think the other side also is the way we've designed it. We've tried to make sure there's minimal impact to your own business or organizational or family structures. So originally it was 4 face-to-face units. We've gone to 2 face-to-face units and 2 online or distance units. We also, it is really hard to teach people things remotely, because the whole drive on this is understanding me, understanding others, and understanding organization. But it's the reality of the world we live in. So if we can't communicate effectively with you remotely and digitally, how do we expect you to do it with your own workforces? So that's been one of the challenges we've embraced as well. But as I said, the structure is really simple. The first block is actually being held in Brisbane, which is why we held the breakfast now here. The next 2 are remote, and the last one is in Sydney. We're also looking at modified programs where we can design and deliver the grad cert specifically for organizations in shortened or more specific timeframes. And so we're really excited about this, because for me it's the first qualification that we've seen that matches and brings together all these different disciplines in one package. And this is the difficulty. If you're that professional who's leading that way, how do you get others to recognize that you're not just a risk manager, or you're not just an HR person that understands how to fill in a risk matrix, that you actually have embraced this understanding of process and people and been able to come up with practical solutions that make a difference. So in terms of moving forward, the objective is obviously to try and solve problems, even if sometimes those are last minute Hail Mary type approaches. Okay. So, obviously, the idea would have been to try and prevent something bad happening in the first place, but every now and again you've got to swoop in with a rescue solution at the last minute. Yeah, and I think if we look at our objective with the program we're trying to put together, it's to try and round people, to try and create that strategic and tactical conflicts with a base of understanding and empathy that is currently missing. We've got great specialists in specific areas. Financial risk. Some of the people who are in charge of governance from a legal perspective, they're experts. But very often the people dynamics are missing. When we look at a lot of the psychological and sociological behavioral change people out there, they very often don't get the business dynamic. So if you implement what they're telling you to do, you will go broke because you don't have the budget to actually make that level of change over the time frames they're recommending. So the only way we're going to do something that really works is educate more people to be able to roll this out within their own organizations, because there's simply not enough consulting hours in the year to be able to get to everybody in a practical way. So I think that probably summarizes what we're trying to look at, and it's trying to create that conflux and that interaction. I hope you found what we discussed today interesting. Taking what is essentially 6 months to a year's worth of education and putting it into 20 minutes is not always easy to do. Thank you for your input and listening. Happy to take and field a few questions if anybody's got any they want to raise now.